Why are vast stretches of the United States in 2025 almost devoid of people? Imagine states with rolling landscapes, majestic mountain ranges, or endless plains, yet you can barely see a single person. What is keeping people away from these places? Is it the economy, extreme weather, or something even stranger? In this video, we'll explore the 9 states with the lowest population density in the United States, looking into why their populations keep thinning out and what makes life in these places difficult for many people. Stay until the end of the video, because some of the reasons are truly surprising and you might not be able to guess which state tops the list. Which one do you think it is? Look at a map of the United States, and Nevada looks pretty enormous. But in reality, it seems that someone somehow left as much as 85% of the state's land sitting unused somewhere. The land is vast and empty, looking almost like some distant planet where we only occasionally see a lonely gas station standing under the blazing sun. Yet behind that seemingly free and wide-open wilderness lies a harsh reality of land use planning that hardly anyone bothers to mention when inviting us to move here. The reality is that more than 80% of Nevada's land is under tight federal control. This creates an invisible wall that blocks almost any attempt to expand the suburbs or build new residential communities in the traditional way we are used to. So what is the result? More than 85% of the state's entire population is squeezed almost entirely into 2 confined areas: Clark County, home to the money-making machine of Las Vegas, and Washoe County, home to Reno. The rest of that vast expanse is nothing more than remote towns, where the population is sometimes smaller than the number of customers lined up to shop at a local Costco on a Saturday morning. And if we think about enduring the weather here, the so-called Mojave Desert climate will quickly teach us a lesson we will never forget. When summer temperatures routinely soar past 110 degrees F, stepping outside is like willingly sentencing ourselves to a giant oven. As if that were not enough, if we look at making a living, Nevada's economic picture is hardly rosy enough for us to relax. The state's entire economic structure relies far too heavily on tourism, entertainment, and hospitality industries that account for roughly 22% to 26% of all jobs, and nearly 1/3 when looking specifically at southern Nevada. To be honest, if we keep listening to all those online advertisements about Idaho, it is easy to think this is a paradise where we can pack our bags and escape the hours-long traffic jams on the highways or the suffocating pace of life in Los Angeles or San Francisco. Who wouldn't like a peaceful place with clean air, where we can sit on the porch in the morning and admire the mountains, then not have to worry about locking the doors at night? The problem is that when tens of thousands of people all have the same idea of escaping, we unintentionally bring all the chaos and high costs we hate so much and dump them right onto this land. This migration boom is not spreading evenly across the entire state. Instead, it is weighing heavily on a few specific hotspots such as Boise, Meridian, and Coeur d'Alene. Population growth in these areas has at times skyrocketed far beyond the national average. So what is the result? Pressure from demand exceeding the limits has pushed the median home price here straight up to between $450,000 and more than $500,000. Local natives and their children and grandchildren can only look at those numbers and shake their heads in frustration, because with modest local wages, reaching a decent home is about as difficult as trying to buy a brand new truck at a Ford or Chevy dealership with only a few coins in your pocket. The bitter part is that average household incomes in Idaho have been stuck in place, completely failing to keep up with the breakneck rise in home prices or electricity and insurance bills from companies like State Farm whenever winter arrives. You work hard all year and save every penny, only to realize that inflation is eating away at your account faster than the wind blowing through a crack in the window. In the end, we have to ask ourselves whether we came here looking for freedom, or whether we are actually just walking straight into a new cost trap disguised under the label of pristine wilderness. Wyoming is a state often praised for its vast open spaces, impressive natural scenery, and outdoor activities. But when it comes to actually living here, the story is a bit different. With a population of just over 580,000 people in 2025, Wyoming is the least populated state in the United States. And to put it simply, this is a place most people pass through rather than settle in. Spanning roughly 97,000 square miles, that means the state has only about 6 people per square mile, an extremely sparse density compared to more populated areas of the US. Are you an introvert who doesn't like social interaction? This place might be your holy grail. But have you ever wondered why such a large state has so few people? One of the reasons Wyoming's population remains so low lies in its economy. The state relies heavily on natural resources, such as coal, oil, and natural gas. These industries generate significant revenue, but they also make the state's economy dependent on the highly volatile global commodities market. When energy prices fall, Wyoming's economy feels the impact, and job opportunities can disappear quite quickly. The median household income in Wyoming is around $64,000, but outside of the energy and agriculture sectors, the state lacks a wide range of career options. The largest city in the state, Cheyenne, has only about 65,000 residents, and even this city cannot offer as many jobs, businesses, or cultural amenities as larger metropolitan areas. And here's an interesting fact about this state. Did you know that the entire state of Wyoming has only 2 escalators? Sounds strange, right? Just one mall in downtown Los Angeles could easily beat Wyoming in the number of escalators. In fact, many malls here don't even have a second floor, which makes sense, since there simply aren't that many customers to begin with. Alaska is truly a giant among the states of the United States. Literally, this state is so large that if you cut it in half, each half would still be bigger than any other state. But despite stretching across about 665,000 square miles, much of Alaska's land is difficult to access and extremely isolated. Not only would you have to drive 40 hours, traveling more than 2,200 miles through remote parts of Canada just to reach the nearest U.S. city outside Alaska, but even within the state itself, towns are often hundreds of miles apart. Many of the largest communities cannot even be reached by car. In fact, the entire state has only about 16,000 miles of roads. That's roughly 5,000 miles fewer than the state of Connecticut, even though Alaska is large enough to fit around 120 Connecticut's inside it. It's no coincidence that people call this place the last frontier, the final land of wilderness. This is a place where grizzly bears, moose, and wolves can appear right near residential areas, and where ancient forests, endless coastlines, towering mountain ranges, and vast tundra combine to form a territory even larger than the country of Mongolia. Just standing in this part of the United States can make you feel like you're inside an episode of National Geographic. But no matter how impressive the scenery is, nature here can be just as harsh. Only about 733,000 residents are willing to live through the long, dark, and freezing winters, when temperatures can drop to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit and daylight lasts less than 4 hours. For people who are used to sunbathing every summer, this place might feel almost like a frozen nightmare. North Dakota, imagine all the problems of its neighbor, South Dakota, multiply them by 10, add a little oil into the mix, and you'll get a rough picture of what life here can be like. The state is widely known for having some of the darkest and coldest winters in the entire contiguous United States. During the coldest months, temperatures can plunge far below zero, strong winds sweep across the open plains, and snowstorms can last for days. The long winter nights also mean fewer daylight hours, which can make the season feel even longer for the people who live here. But winter is only part of the story. Summers in North Dakota can swing in the opposite direction, bringing stretches of hot and humid weather across the wide prairie landscape. Springtime can be unpredictable as well, often bringing sudden storms and flash floods that can damage roads, farmland, and small communities. With weather patterns that shift so dramatically from season to season, living here requires a certain level of resilience. Given these conditions, it's perhaps not surprising that fewer than 780,000 people call this isolated state home. In fact, many observers say that neighboring South Dakota tends to attract more attention, thanks to its scenic landmarks, slightly milder weather, and a somewhat more diverse economy. Another major factor is geography. North Dakota sits far from most of the large metropolitan areas that drive economic activity in the United States. Major cities like Chicago, Denver, or Minneapolis are hundreds of miles away, and that distance can make everyday logistics more complicated. Access to specialized services, large markets, or major transportation hubs can require long drives or connecting flights. For businesses that rely on fast supply chains or a large customer base, that level of isolation can make expansion difficult. History also played an important role in shaping the state's population. During the great waves of westward migration in the 19th century, many settlers passed through the Great Plains while searching for land that offered better farming conditions and more stable climates. Instead of stopping in what is now North Dakota, a large number of them kept moving west until they reached regions closer to the Pacific coast, where agricultural land was more productive and the growing season was longer. Because of this migration pattern, North Dakota never developed the same level of dense settlement or urban growth seen in other parts of the country. You think South Dakota would escape this list? Think again. South Dakota, the home of Wall Drug, one of the most famous roadside attractions in America. Wait, Wall Drug? Oh, right. We meant Mount Rushmore. Sorry about that. But if you've ever driven across the western part of the state, you probably know exactly why Wall Drug comes to mind first. Long before you even arrive there, you start seeing the billboards. One sign turns into 5, 5 turns into 50, and before you know it, you've passed hundreds of billboards advertising the place along the highway. Free ice water, homemade donuts, 5-cent coffee. The signs keep coming for miles and miles across the prairie. By the time you finally reach Wall Drug, it almost feels less like a destination and more like the conclusion of a long advertising campaign you've been watching unfold for hours. To be fair, the marketing strategy is incredibly effective. Few roadside attractions in the United States have managed to become this memorable, but the fact that one roadside store can dominate the landscape of conversation for hundreds of miles also says quite a lot about South Dakota itself. And that brings us to the defining feature of this state: space. A lot of space. South Dakota is vast, open, and incredibly spread out. Once you leave the small cities and tourist areas behind, the land stretches outward in wide plains and rolling grasslands that seem to continue forever. The highways cut through enormous open landscapes where you might drive for long stretches without seeing another town. It's the kind of place where the horizon feels unusually far away and where the sky truly lives up to the phrase, "big sky country." That sense of openness is one of the main reasons South Dakota remains one of the least populated and lowest density states in the United States, with roughly 999,000 residents. At first glance, that number might not sound extremely small, but when you spread fewer than 1 million people across such a large area, the result is a state that feels remarkably empty compared to much of the rest of the country. Montana, often called Big Sky Country, is just as massive as its nickname suggests, and just as sparsely populated. Covering more than 147,000 square miles, Montana is the fourth largest state in the United States. Yet by 2025, fewer than 1.15 million people live here. To put that into perspective, that's still fewer people than the population of the city of San Antonio, Texas, even though Montana's land area is roughly comparable to the entire country of Germany. So why does Montana feel like such a vast but quiet paradise? First, there's the economic structure. The state relies heavily on agriculture, tourism, and mining industries that don't necessarily attract large numbers of young professionals searching for careers in modern sectors. Then there's the weather. Put simply, this is not a place for people who give up easily. Winters in Montana can be extremely harsh, with temperatures frequently dropping below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. In towns like Havre, blizzards can blanket entire regions, and severe winter storms sometimes isolate rural communities for weeks at a time. Summers are warm and beautiful, but they can also bring wildfires that burn across thousands of acres every year. And that's not all. Montana is home to one of the largest grizzly bear populations in the contiguous United States, with around 1,800 bears living in its forests and mountain ranges. So if you're planning to hike out in the wilderness, you might want to think twice before forgetting to bring bear spray. The job market in Montana isn't particularly booming either. The median household income is around $60,000 per year, which is lower than the national average, and career opportunities can be limited unless you live near larger cities like Billings or Missoula. Maine sits so far to the north of the United States that many people living here could almost be considered Canadian. I mean, the state is practically surrounded by friendly maple syrup-loving neighbors from Canada, and the natural scenery here looks almost the same. Mysterious pine forests, glacial lakes, rugged rocky coastlines, and of course moose. All of these create a landscape that feels both wild and impressive. So why does such a beautiful state remain relatively sparsely populated, with only about 1.385 million residents, especially when compared to other states along the U.S. East Coast? The answer is fairly simple. The climate. If you look at a population density map of Maine, You'll notice that most residents live in the southern part of the state or along the coastline, where farmland is more fertile and winters are slightly milder. Winters in the rest of Maine, however, can feel a bit different. Imagine the winters in Game of Thrones, harsh and seemingly endless. Because of this, much of the state never developed a large industrial base, especially considering that about 89% of the land area is still covered by largely untouched forests. The city of Portland is an exception. It's a young, charming city with many great restaurants and a relatively stable economy. But outside of Portland, Maine is still considered the most rural state in the United States, with only about 38.7% of its population living in urban areas. So unless you're financially comfortable and enjoy snowmobiling across frozen lakes thousands of times, this state doesn't necessarily offer many reasons for young people to stay. Many young residents leave Maine in their early 20s and only start thinking about returning when they reach retirement age. It's no coincidence that the Pine Tree State, Maine's nickname also has the highest median age in the United States, at around 44.8 years old. So for anyone looking for a peaceful place to enjoy quiet days by the coast, Maine might actually be worth considering. Aside from being known as the home state of Bernie Sanders, when many people think about Vermont, they often picture cozy farmhouses surrounded by vibrant autumn foliage. The classic image usually includes quiet country roads, wooden barns, and rolling hills covered in bright shades of red, orange, and yellow during the fall season. Residents wake up to the sound of birds chirping, the gentle flow of nearby streams, and the crisp mountain air that defines much of life in northern New England. Many mornings begin with a hearty breakfast, pancakes or waffles, generously covered with Vermont's famous maple syrup. And honestly, that peaceful image isn't very far from reality. Despite its charm, Vermont remains one of the least populated states in the country. Even though it is the sixth smallest state in the United States by area, it is truly a rural paradise. Only about 38.9% of its residents live in urban areas, which means the majority of the population still lives in small towns, villages, or scattered rural communities. The landscape itself also plays a major role in shaping how people live here. Vermont is filled with mountains, thick forests, and winding valleys, terrain that is beautiful but not always ideal for building large cities or major infrastructure. Because of this geography, Vermont never developed the kind of massive urban centers seen in other parts of the country. Instead, the state grew around small communities connected by quiet highways and local roads. Today, the entire population is only about 647,000 residents, making Vermont one of the smallest states in terms of population as well. But wait, if you take another look at the map, you might notice something interesting. Vermont borders Canada, and more than half of the states on this list do too. So does that mean the real reason Americans don't live here is because they secretly don't like Canadians? Of course, that's probably just a joke. A more realistic explanation is much simpler. Canada is cold, and states that sit right next to Canada often experience very similar weather patterns. Winters in Vermont can be long, snowy, and freezing, with temperatures dropping well below comfortable levels for months at a time. For people who prefer warm climates and sunny beaches, that kind of environment can be a tough sell. Delaware is nearly twice the size of Rhode Island, but with an area of only about 1,948 square miles, roughly comparable to the size of the city of Anchorage, it's still extremely small by American standards. Despite its modest size, Delaware plays an outsized role in the American economy. In fact, the state is widely known as the corporate capital of the United States, serving as the legal home for more than 2 million companies. On paper, that number might make you expect a massive financial hub filled with skyscrapers, bustling business districts, and millions of workers. But the reality looks very different. The largest city in Delaware, Wilmington, has only about 70,000 residents. That's smaller than many suburbs in larger metropolitan areas. For a state that legally hosts so many corporations, the absence of a large city can feel surprising. So why didn't Delaware develop a major metropolis the way other economically important regions did? Part of the answer lies just 30 miles away. The nearby city of Philadelphia grew rapidly during the early years of American history and quickly became one of the most important urban centers in the country. Its location along major rivers, its access to trade routes, and its historical role as the birthplace of the United States gave it a massive head start. Once Philadelphia established itself as the dominant city of the region, It effectively absorbed much of the economic energy that might otherwise have fueled the growth of nearby places like Wilmington. Geography also played a role. Much of Delaware sits slightly off the main path of the I-95 corridor and away from many of the historic commercial routes that shaped early American trade. While cities along those routes expanded into major economic hubs, Delaware developed in a quieter way. Instead of building massive industrial centers, large portions of the state leaned toward tourism, small coastal communities, and suburban living. Let's zoom down to Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States. On the map, it's practically a speck, the kind of place you could miss if you blink while looking at a map of the East Coast. But what Rhode Island lacks in size, it more than makes up for in density. More than 1 million people are packed into just 1,034 square miles, which means this tiny state feels less like a collection of cities and towns and more like one giant, interconnected neighborhood. In some places, it really does feel like everyone knows your name, whether you like it or not. And that extreme compactness is really the defining feature of Rhode Island. Everything is close. Cities blend into suburbs, suburbs blend into coastal towns. And before you know it, you've crossed half the state without even realizing it. Drive for 40 minutes in almost any direction and you're likely already near the border. In a way, Rhode Island feels less like a state and more like a single extended metro area where everything happens within arm's reach. But here's the catch. Rhode Island has all the classic New England charm, yet many people feel it no longer comes with the same advantages it once did. The cost of living has been creeping upward year after year, climbing faster than a vine wrapping around a trellis. Housing prices have steadily increased, rents are rising, and everyday expenses can feel surprisingly high for such a small place. If you squint a little, parts of Rhode Island are starting to resemble a miniature version of New York, just without the towering skyline, the massive job market, or the endless public transit options. Still, it wouldn't be fair to say the state doesn't have its strengths. Rhode Island's coastline is one of its biggest highlights. The beaches are beautiful, the Atlantic breeze keeps summers pleasant, and the seafood here is legendary. Lobster rolls, clam chowder, fresh oysters. If you love seafood, you're probably going to feel right at home. And that's the story of some of the largest yet most sparsely populated places in the United States. When you look at the map, you might see a densely populated country filled with bright cities and busy highways, but once you step outside those urban centers, a completely different picture appears. Long mountain ranges, endless forests, and plains that seem to stretch all the way to the horizon, where people are far fewer than many might expect. For some people, these places may feel too remote or too harsh to live in for the long term. But for others, the quiet atmosphere, wide open spaces, and slower pace of life are exactly what make these regions so appealing. So, the real question might not only be why so many places in America remain sparsely populated, but also whether you would want to live in a place like that. What do you think? If you had the chance, would you be willing to move to one of the states on this list? Or would you rather visit once and then return to the familiar rhythm of city life? One last thing. Please note that the content in this video is compiled from publicly available sources, official documents, and analytical references. The video is created for the purpose of exploring and providing information about the states of the United States. Viewers should conduct further research through official sources of each state and consider their personal needs before making any decisions related to living, investing, or traveling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next explorations.